Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the After Service, a production of Open Door Community Church featuring your pastor, Brian Ricketts, and me.
And you. Oh, Pastor Joe, and we're so happy to have you here. We need to make sure we get the title changed on this. But we're continuing our series on how we need to rethinking politics as Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is an exciting. We're going through a book that I would recommend. It's called what is it called? The Political Gospel: Public Witness in a Politically Crazy World by Patrick Schreiner. Yeah, it's a good book, and it's something I think is desperately needed today in a world that's very divided and hotly so, and in a year that is so, well, obviously politics is a national conversation currently.
So before we jump in today,
yes,
have you received any feedback? I wasn't there on Sunday. People who are watching us already know that, but
I didn't. But that's okay. I haven't. I actually, honestly, I'm sorry to say, I haven't looked at last week's podcast on YouTube or Facebook. So yeah, I have it.
That's all right. I think I went in and I changed the name of it afterward, but that was
good.
So quick. It was 20 minutes after we recorded. So I think there was. Yeah. Just curious, okay, in case there was something that we needed to circle back on or any clarifying questions. So.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So you told me ahead of time that you put together a little summary of chapter 1, which is called The Way of the Kingdom. And
right.
I'll let you take over.
The point is, what he's trying to make the case for in this chapter is that the message of Jesus is political, that it is about, reading my notes, the arrival of a new social order, a new government rule. That's what he's trying to communicate, make that case. And he does that by beginning by redefining, or maybe reforming is a better word, of 3 words that we Christians use all the time. One of them is gospel. We think of it as just good news. And while that's the case, but it was also a very political, it was constantly used politically at the time for things like the birth of a king, the conquest of a ruler or an emperor, kind of a military victory, or just political change, the death of someone, a new edict. That's what a gospel is political. It's a political announcement. The second.
Yeah. Well, are we going to take one at a time?
I can. Yeah.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll just insert a
Yeah, we don't have to say it all. So there you go.
Yeah, it's I think we have this tendency, because the word gospel is so much a part of our vernacular when we are speaking about our faith, that it's almost like we assume the word was invented for us and for the Christian faith. And we lose sight that the word has its own etymology that is prior to that. It had its own use, and that it has come to mean more than that, and has lost the political connotation that you're speaking of. And so the idea that, if you said so and so won the election in Australia, so that would be somebody trumpeting that, or announcing it. That is the gospel of the rise of Blowhard the Magnificent, new president of Australia, or whatever.
Right. That's exactly what it is. And it was very common. This reminds me of one of my favorite theologians who recently passed. Michael Heiser said that that when we say we want to read the Bible in context, that doesn't mean read it in our context. It doesn't even mean the Reformation era context. It's the first century context when it was written.
Yeah.
Or earlier than that, if we're talking about the Old Testament. And so these words had meanings of the day, and Jesus is incorporating that word. And yeah, I always assumed that it was an Old Testament word, but I only can really think of one or two places in the Old Testament that that phrase gospel was used, and I haven't done research fully, but maybe there was more. But it may have been something he simply adopted from the culture to fit, well, frankly, a clearly Old Testament announcement of the coming of the kingdom. So yeah, gospel is a political phrase.
Yeah. And if you try to use that in a, let's say, a non-Christian context today, it would immediately be assumed that it was being used in a Christian context.
Right.
And that's even if you're talking to somebody that isn't a follower of Christ, it is spread enough and is assumed enough to be representative of the Christian faith that people will just go, oh, that's what you must be talking about the Bible or something.
Right. Do you think a current phrase would be something like breaking news?
Yeah, except, but to the point of the author, breaking news theoretically is politically agnostic. It is,
Right.
whereas this does have it is one side of a victory proclaiming the good news of their political victory.
It makes me think of those headlines, after World War II, where you have those giant words in the newspaper, victory, exclamation point.
Yeah, well, yeah, or it's a press release from a political organization.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. In all caps.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you can almost hear the old timey voice, and he wins another tournament, or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So that's the first one, that he's using again to help us reform how we think about these words. The first one is gospel.
Yeah.
And while it and I'm going to say this about all of it, it's not. I agree with everything he's saying. It's not the only lens to read these things. It's not the only way to consider when we talk about what is the gospel. But it certainly is a nuance that we don't have, that perhaps we've lost.
Yeah. Yep.
The second one that kind of follows that is kingdom, and that, even today a little bit we think of that in terms of a political phrase, but we don't. It's easy to just lump that in with all the other religious-y words. And so he uses, it's words like monarchy or empire or nation, or, it's a word that specifically is political, talking about a governmental rule.
This one's not as much of a stretch to me, and part of it is because I grew up playing role-playing games where the idea of a kingdom or a fiefdom or something like that was kind of part of storytelling. When I read a lot of fantasy novels when I was, teenager and beyond, for that matter. So it's not as much of a stretch. So like gospel immediately go to
Hyper-religious.
Right, versus kingdom, where I kind of have to understand the context to know how to interpret that word.
Right. Which I wonder if more Americans were British.
Sure.
Or sense. I mean, we would have a little bit easier time just making that connection. But yeah, and I was trying to think how should we, because one of the nuances he talked about this is that when Jesus is going around announcing the arrival of the kingdom, it's that he's announcing a political change. He's announced, you put the two things, the gospel of a kingdom, and so it's like the announcing, and this was my analogy, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. If those of you who are listening probably heard a certain dog announcing its frustration.
Because one of my boys came home and he asked to say hello.
Yeah.
It would be like in being in Nazi Germany in 1944, announcing the coming of the Allies.
Yeah. Well, and the story they used, I thought was really interesting, about if somebody went into Henry Ford's, factory and then said, "Hey, everything's gonna." Another car manufacturer came in and said, "Oh, by the way, everything's moving to electric, and it's going to take over," and then left. It's like you're going into enemy territory, basically, your competitor's territory, and saying, "You're not going to be here anymore. Your kingdom is going to change."
Charge anymore.
Yeah.
And so that really is a disrupting of the status quo.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the important part of the context of the word kingdom, and how Jesus kind of subverted the existing leadership and why he was such a threat, because he came in and announced the leadership change is coming, the change of kingdom is coming. And I think they talked about two different, I can't remember the name of the king.
Herod?
No, let me see. I've got the book open here. When he was born, there was one guy named such and such. Herod. Yeah, two King Herods. Did you say Herod or Baron? I think he said
Herod.
Baron. And I'm like, I don't know who Baron
Herod.
is. And I don't. Yeah, Herod. Sorry. I can hear. Yeah, two different Herods. Yeah.
He tried to kill all the babies because, oh, wait a minute, there's the birth of a new king. Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Boy, if you get worked up over power struggles today, think about living in that day when it's like, oh, somebody's going to take power from me. I guess I'll have to kill all the kids.
But but again, coming to our point is that using especially those two phrases together, the gospel of the kingdom, it's the announcement of a new king is in town, that he's ruling, he's going to conquer, the political change is coming, this new nation is in me, is now here. That's and it was understood that way.
Yeah.
Book, that he asked, well, why was Jesus killed? And sometimes people don't know that answer, actually, but there's two answers. One is that for the religious leaders, it was blasphemy that he called himself God, which undermines the whole reason why people think Jesus never, the whole argument Jesus never called himself God.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he was killed by the Jewish leaders. But for Pilate, from the Roman perspective, it's because he called himself a king. It was it was treason. This is why Jesus was killed by the Romans, is because he said he was a king.
Yeah, and I think the Romans were in many ways manipulated by the religious leaders
Sure.
into seeing him even more so as a true political threat to their kingdom.
Right, and there's some nuance in that. My kingdom is not of this world and all that. But the point he's making is that those phrases are political. Jesus is incorporating political language.
Yeah.
The last one, unless you have more to say about kingdom.
No, go for it.
Belief. This is the one that I know it. Actually, most of this I was like, well, yeah, I know this. But this one was like, oh, that's interesting, a viewpoint. That belief, yes, it has to do with trust, but it's also about allegiance, fidelity, faithfulness to a particular leader. And so this is my kind of summary, what he's saying. This is not how he said it, but this is how I would say it. It's like you're expressing what you're being called to is express loyalty in Jesus because you believe his claims that he is the king.
Yeah, it's I think about it in a way, like in a context today that, saying I believe that this person is going to accomplish this. And because of that, I'm aligned with that person.
Yeah.
I believe in the Celtics. It's and they're it's important for me to align myself with a team that I know is going to win. So, my allegiance will be with that team because I think they're the ones that are going to win.
Right. It's like that.
Yeah. And if your life was at stake and you were told that you needed to ally yourself with whoever was going to win something, right? Then you would express, I believe in this team and therefore I'm aligned with that team.
Do you think, to put it in this back in the day, I don't know, but this just occurred to me. Do you think by claiming the identity of Christian would be similar, how it was understood then would be similar to saying I'm a Democrat or a Republican? You see what I'm saying? I believe that's my team.
I don't think that's, but mostly because Christianity was such a small sect, that if we're, what's that?
It's libertarian.
I was just going to say that it's the Libertarian Party, that I'm going to believe in this, this idea. I'm going to support this idea. I'm going to ally myself to this idea that most people think has no chance of being successful. That's dismissed. And, in today's political terms, if we're talking about political parties, that's a very rational way to think, right? It's like the way that our United States political system is built, it's just not going to happen, right? There's too many pieces at play. And you might think that with Christ, but it was God.
Right.
And
but from a non-belief and secular viewpoint, well, yeah, it's just this silly little sect that's making some noise, but that's really all it is.
Right. It's never going to amount to anything. And now that he's dead, we don't even have to worry about it anymore.
Right. Right. It's just these fanatics, with their own particular quirky ideas, but that's really all it is. Yeah. So belief, yeah, I think that's true. And I think that's something, just the idea of loyalty to Jesus. Wow. I think that is true. And it Paul pulls in some of the things that he talks again, later in the chapter about the titles that Jesus took on for himself, or the disciples assigned to him, like Lord or Savior or even the Son of God. Those are political words, and we're assigning them to Jesus. Yeah. And so what we're saying when we say Jesus is Lord, we're saying, I think that's close to saying Jesus is my president. It's think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. He's not elected, but you're acknowledging him in that role. If you think about like tribalism, right? That where the strongest tribe gets to rule over, right? And so I think, Gruck over here, he's big, strong, and he's fast. He's got a lot of people in his camp. And you're there because he's going to protect you because he's strong, right? What's that?
So I believe in Gronk or whatever it is.
Right. And then you have Christ come in and is this skinny guy who doesn't seem to have much going for him. And he's got 12 people around him that are like, no, I think this guy's got it. and then he does, so I'm not thinking about, it's not an elected thing. It's like, it's a power thing.
Well, it made me think, well, here's another example that's sort of more close to it. Like, I think about Robin Hood, who Lord, was it King Richard, or what was the other guy, the guy we don't want, right?
Yeah. Richard was he the king, and then or was Richard his cousin?
one of them was the rightful ruler, but they thought he was dead, and then the other guy was kind of ruling in his stead. And so to call this
Oh yeah,
other guy Lord is to say, wait a minute, he's Lord and you're not.
it was John. So Richard was the king, and John. I just looked it up. Yeah, John was the one who was trying to usurp the throne.
There we go.
Yeah.
That might be somewhat similar, I guess. So again, all of these together means what Jesus is. He's announcing his victory. He's announcing his arrival. The coming of a new kingdom, and we need to swear allegiance to him, which is both a public and political message. And so that's kind of what he's getting at. As I'm looking at the rest of it, we've kind of put it all in there. But my question for this is, what's the implications for that? He kind of ends the chapter with this and brings up lots of questions, like what? I don't know. That's the issue. I think it's refreshing. I think there's truth in this, but I'm not quite sure what are the downstream effects of this.
And because I haven't read chapter 2, I would agree that when finishing chapter 1, for me, it was a bit of a cliffhanger, because the author has taken chapter 1 and used it as an opportunity to lay the foundation for further discussion, but he's not telling us what it is. Right? So I'm like, okay, you've told me these things, and I'm not in disagreement, but in my typical kind of fence straddling way, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to lean in on this until I have a better understanding of where he's going.
Yeah.
If that's fair.
He does say it doesn't mean that we are to be anarchists or reformers or revolutionaries to set up our own, Christian kingdom here on earth. And that's not what it is. Which I think in part is what Jesus is getting at when he says, my kingdom is not of this world. But if we pull in what's going on in the introduction, he's going to end up going that what it means, I think, is part of the time it means we need to be subversive, because we are aligned to a different nation, a different social structure. We believe in that structure and that king.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're also called to not be a rebellious people. But to submit to current authorities. And so there's this tension between the two, and figuring out how that all plays out is going. I still don't quite know what that looks like. And maybe that's something you and I are going to be able to have to just kind of figure out as well, because I'm not sure how much he's going to lay out more than what I literally just stated. We'll find out. It's been a while since I've read the book.
Yeah. I think the tension that you feel at the end of the chapter is, okay, you've provided me with information, and I don't know how to apply this yet.
Right.
And I think that's a good thing to feel, because, when I taught, I guess it was last month, I talked about certainty, and we are told to kind of move through this world with a degree of our culture tells us to move with a certain with an amount of certainty, and we don't like being in this uncomfortable space in the middle, and I think navigating politics, as our author is explaining to us, that Jesus was a political figure with a political message in many ways. It wasn't, we take the word believe, and there's an allegiance there. I mean, you even see allegiance and believe, and they have some degree of relationship as words. But that we are so focused on the partisan aspect of it, that for somebody to provide us nuance and say, navigate the tension between your desire for certainty and also the need to understand context before you engage. That's
Yeah.
not what we've been taught. We've been taught to, oh, we need to respond immediately in this specific way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I suspect it's going to get down to that. One of the implications is going to be that what it means is that it's going to challenge how we stand on certain political issues, political topics. I guess that's how, and just how we relate ourselves to the parties. Yeah, because we still have to eventually get down to the whole topic of, well, does that mean I should be in the Republic? I mean, how do you
Yeah.
escape partisan questions? I don't know. How do you escape having a stance on whether it's abortion or the border or who should be president? And I don't, I don't know. I just don't know. And this is one of the things I've been telling people as well is like, I don't know. I don't know how to navigate this. I agree with everything in this chapter. I just don't know what it means.
And
I
what I'm interested in understanding, maybe as much as anything, is if we are in a world where people are responding to partisan circumstances, and I'm not like non-Christian, secular people who are, or just from a secular perspective, are responding in broad, dramatic ways to circumstances. How do we respond to these people? Not how do we respond to the situation itself, but how do we respond to people? And I'm thinking specifically, there's the Harrison Butker, who's the kicker for the Chiefs.
right. I
Right?
actually talked Sunday.
Oh, okay. I want to talk to you about that after this a little bit, but that I wasn't aware of it until I saw outrage, right? And so then it's almost that outrage is an invitation to engage. And do we resist that invitation, or do we have a role in engaging? And that's something I'm interested in understanding if we're going to receive some guidance on that as we go through, because it's hard not to engage when we feel like somebody has it wrong.
Right. I don't know. Right. How do we? We should probably wrap it up at this point. But
Yeah.
it's like I just so we know where it's like I agree. We have to figure out how do we engage with the people, but also how do we engage? How do we perceive? How do we understand and react to events? I feel like is there too. I don't know. And maybe not react to the events.
Yeah. Well, let's talk offline.
Yeah. Anyway, so
All right.
anyway, thanks for joining us. Please, as always, if you have questions, thoughts, comments, please put them in there. I would love to have some more information. If actually, honestly, if you want to sit down and have a cup of coffee with me on this stuff, I'm happy to do that as well. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you on Sunday.
Take care, folks.
Take care.